Thursday night, October 31st, 1974. The sky was so dark, wrapped in a gentle cold breeze, creating the perfect Halloween atmosphere. Dim lights twinkled at every house, giving both a magical and eerie feeling. Children roamed around with joyful laughter, dressed in a variety of costumes. Some pretended to be witches with pointed hats and faces painted green, while others disguised themselves as Dracula with glaring fake fangs, and some wore black robes with terrifying skull crowns. They hopped from one door to another, with the sound of "trick or treat" echoing in the night air, accompanied by cheerful laughter that filled the streets scattered with orange and red dry leaves. Some children ran around, rolling fake eyeballs and letting out small shrieks as they hid behind spooky decorative statues. Their bags full of colorful candies shook in their hands, the sweet aroma blending with the excitement of the night. However, behind the happiness and the festive spirit of that night, a horrifying tragedy was lurking, waiting to unfold. This event would later mark a dark chapter in the history of Halloween celebrations in America. Ronald Clark O'Bryan, a 30-year-old father, accompanied his two children, Timothy, 8, and Elizabeth, 5, in the joy of Halloween night. Along with their neighbor Jim Bates and his 5 children, they went around the neighborhood in Pasadena, Texas, engaging in the tradition of trick-or-treating. The children visited houses with their lights on, hoping to get candy while jokingly saying, "Trick or treat!" At first, it was just a children's game full of laughter, but no one knew that the night would end in terror. Behind Ronald's calm smile as he accompanied the children on Halloween night, a storm was raging within him. Financial problems were like a dark shadow that never left him, constantly looming over his every step. As an optometrist in Deer Park, Texas, he appeared to be just a regular father. But behind that facade, his life was slowly falling apart. His unstable job caused Ronald to frequently move from one place to another. Every time he thought he had found a secure place, something always went wrong. Internal conflicts at work, performance considered unsatisfactory, or pressure from his superiors, all of this kept him on edge, never knowing when he might be fired again. At home, things weren't much better. Financial stress had turned his household into a battleground of arguments. Debates with his wife, Dana, had become a daily routine. Ronald knew his wife was worried. Their debts were piling up, unpaid bills cluttered the kitchen table, and the future felt like a bottomless pit ready to swallow them at any moment. Every time Dana started a conversation about money, Ronald's blood would rush. His head felt heavy, his breathing labored, but he had no answers. They were already tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and there seemed to be no way out. However, on that Halloween night, Ronald had to hide all his anxiety behind a smile. Beneath the mask of happiness, his face was stiff, his eyes empty, even though his lips were smiling. He had to pretend to be happy, concealing the fact that every moment with his family felt like a reminder of the inevitable failure. As he watched his children laugh and run with joy, the tightness in his chest grew stronger. He knew this might be one of the last nights they could still feel normal. And behind that mask, there was a terrible decision he had already made, a plan that would change their lives forever, and there was no turning back. After going around the neighborhood, Timothy and Elizabeth's candy bags were full of all sorts of sweets, and among them, pixie sticks was their favorite. Their little mouths couldn't stop laughing and shouting with excitement, expressing their boundless joy. Their eyes sparkled every time they found a new candy in their bags. For them, the night felt like a sugar-filled paradise. Ronald's wife, Dana, greeted her small family with a broad smile, happy to see their children so delighted by the Halloween tradition. But there was something different in Ronald's expression, something hard to read, hidden behind a thin smile that seemed fake. In the living room, Timothy and Elizabeth eagerly emptied all the candy they had gotten, pouring it onto the floor. "Pixie sticks! This is my favorite!" Timothy exclaimed excitedly, while Elizabeth was just as enthusiastic. Their joy was the perfect sight on Halloween night. However, on the other side of the room, Ronald sat, gripping something tightly in his pocket. His face looked pale. Every smile he showed, though it appeared calm, held a wave of anxiety that only he could feel. Restlessness shadowed his every move, like a storm ready to strike. As his two children were busy with their candy, Ronald finally took something out of his pocket, a pixie sticks he had prepared earlier. His hand trembled slightly as he offered it to Timothy and Elizabeth, who looked at the candy with eager eyes. Time seemed to slow down, the air around them growing colder. Ronald could feel his heart pounding. His face remained calm, but his eyes couldn't hide the tension weighing on his mind. The guilt gnawing at his conscience made the moments even more nerve-wracking. Timothy, with an innocent smile glowing on his little face, reached for the pixie sticks his father handed him. "I love this, Dad," he shouted enthusiastically before opening the brightly colored candy wrapper. Elizabeth, his 5-year-old sister, just watched her brother while playing with the candy their father had given her. As soon as Timothy tasted the candy, sweetness filled his tongue. But within seconds, something strange happened. The sweet taste turned into a sharp bitterness. Timothy's cheerful face slowly turned pale. His lips began to tremble, and suddenly his small body collapsed to the floor. Timothy groaned in pain, clutching his stomach as if something was violently stirring inside him. A burning sensation seemed to spread through his organs, torturing him with every passing second. His groans sounded choked, his voice muffled by the overwhelming pain. Foam started to come out of his mouth, mixed with vomit that suddenly gushed out, covering the carpet in their living room. His small stomach writhed as if trying to expel something that was causing him unbearable agony. Dana panicked. With trembling hands, she shook her son's body, lying motionless on the floor, desperately trying to wake him up. Ronald knelt beside her, his eyes wide, but there was something unusual in his gaze. Amid the chaos, his face showed confusion, but the expression seemed forced. As he called for an ambulance, Ronald tried to show panic, though deep inside, he felt a strange and hard-to-describe emotion. When they finally arrived at the hospital, the medical staff worked hard to save Timothy. Dana couldn't hold back her tears, which kept flowing as she watched her son in pain. Meanwhile, Ronald stood with a pale face, his tense expression reflecting panic. At times, his gaze seemed strange, hinting at something deeper than just a father watching his son suffer. After an hour of struggle, the steady beeping of the medical machines slowly faded. In the eerie silence of the room, the lead doctor stood with a tired look on his face, his eyes full of regret. He took a deep breath before approaching Ronald and Dana, who waited anxiously outside the room. "We've done everything we could," he said, his voice heavy with pain. "But Timothy has passed away." The sentence dropped like a bomb, destroying all the hope in the room. Dana staggered. Her face turned pale, her eyes wide as if refusing to believe what she had just heard. "No, it can't be." Her voice cracked in her throat, almost like a whisper full of pain. She hugged herself, trying to hold back the sharp ache in her chest. "What happened to my son?" she asked, her voice trembling through her sobs. Tears flowed down her cheeks, uncontrollably. Ronald, standing beside her, pulled her close. He wrapped his arms tightly around her as if trying to shield her from the terrible reality that had just struck them. "Dana, we have to be patient," he whispered softly but tensely. His hand stroked her back as though trying to calm her, though deep down, he was hiding his own unease. "Let the doctors investigate. They will figure out what really happened," Ronald said. Yet Ronald's expression seemed strange. Beneath the panic and sadness he displayed, there was something dark. Occasionally, his eyes flashed coldly, though he quickly returned to a concerned face. Dana, completely consumed by her grief, didn't notice the subtle change. She could only sob in her husband's arms, hoping that all of this was just a nightmare that would soon end. Around them, The silence of the medical machines felt like a cruel reminder that Timothy's young life had been taken in an unforgivable way. The news of Timothy's death on Halloween night shook the entire neighborhood of Pasadena, Texas. The incident didn't just become a hot topic in the local community, but gradually spread across the country, shocking the American public. Dana was consumed with deep grief, feeling as if the world around her had collapsed. Her tears flowed endlessly, soaking her pale cheeks. Every corner of the house reminded her of her son's cheerful smile, the small laughter that had now become only a memory. She sat in the corner of the living room, holding Timothy's Halloween costume from the night of his death, inhaling the faint scent still lingering on the fabric. The sadness gripping her heart made it hard to breathe, as if a heavy weight was pressing down on her. Meanwhile, Ronald, though trying to appear calm, displayed strange and mysterious behavior after the loss of his son. He spoke little and only responded to questions in a flat tone, as if his mind was trapped in a maze of darkness. Ronald's eyes were empty, as though something was missing inside him. Occasionally, when Dana cried, he tried to comfort her with a gentle embrace, but his movements seemed mechanical, as if he were stuck in the role of a strong husband. The deep sorrow filled their home, making the atmosphere more tense. Every second felt heavy, as if time had slowed down, while Dana struggled against the unrelenting waves of grief. She felt the loss of Timothy so painfully, as if a part of her had been lost forever. Ronald, despite all his efforts to console Dana, was hiding something deeper, a mystery now eating away at his own heart. Within hours, police and forensic officers got involved to investigate the cause of the 8-year-old boy's death. They began the investigation by examining every possible detail connected to the tragic event. The investigators interviewed Ronald and Dana, as well as the neighbors who had participated in trick-or-treating that night. Every step Timothy had taken from the afternoon until the night was carefully mapped out, as they tried to uncover what had really happened. The authorities didn't stop at interviews and reconstructing the events. They collected all the food and candy Timothy had consumed that night, including the candy he had gotten during trick-or-treating. Each candy, each snack, was meticulously examined until the laboratory results revealed a shocking discovery. Timothy had died from ingesting a high dose of cyanide poison. Further investigation uncovered something even more astonishing. The cyanide found in Timothy's body came from the Pixie Stix candy he had eaten. But that wasn't the end of the surprises. Police discovered that similar candy, also containing the deadly poison, was in the hands of other children. Elizabeth, Timothy's younger sister, and 3 other children who had participated in trick-or-treating, including Jim Bates's kids, had the poison candy as well. Luckily, none of them had eaten the candy for various reasons. In fact, some of the candy packages containing cyanide were still sealed. At first, the police believed Timothy's death was caused by cyanide poisoning from candy he had randomly received during trick-or-treating on Halloween night. The police conducted an intense investigation, following every lead and possible clue to uncover the true cause of Timothy's tragic death. Detectives worked tirelessly, connecting pieces of evidence that slowly began to form a grim picture. However, behind the curtain of mystery, something unexpected began to surface. The prime suspect revealed by the investigation was not a stranger. While many believed this was just a tragic Halloween accident, the truth increasingly pointed to a shocking figure, Ronald Clark O'Bryan, Timothy's own father. The police's decision to charge Ronald with premeditated murder stunned the American public. The news spread like wildfire, alarming the residents of Pasadena and eventually the whole country, causing fear and shaking the O'Bryan family. Dana, his wife, couldn't accept the accusation so easily. How could Ronald, a man she knew as a gentle and loving husband and father, commit such a cruel act? He's a good father who loved his children dearly, Dana said with a broken heart. Her belief in Ronald's innocence only added to her torment, but the police remained firm in their stance. Ronald was arrested and taken to the police station for further questioning. Gradually, the truth started to unfold. The police discovered significant cracks in Ronald's seemingly perfect life. New evidence began to emerge, some pointing to a carefully planned, sinister plot. One of the most suspicious findings was the fact that Ronald had recently taken out a large life insurance policy on both of his children just months before the Halloween tragedy, without Dana's knowledge. Even more concerning, a few weeks before that dreadful night, he had increased the insurance claims, strengthening suspicions that this was no coincidence. However, the most obvious motive was Ronald's financial troubles. The enormous financial pressure and debt of nearly $100,000 became a key factor driving him to do the unthinkable. The burden of debt and desperation seemed to have transformed Ronald into a different man, someone capable of planning his own child's death to claim the insurance money. Though some evidence had been revealed, there were still clues yet to be presented. The police had not disclosed all the findings, saving them for trial when the full truth would be laid bare before the public. In the deep darkness of the night, Dana stood on the edge of an emotional abyss, where pain and confusion blended together. The air felt heavy, as if every breath she took was filled with unbearable sorrow. She had just lost her child, the little figure who had filled her days with laughter and smiles, now leaving behind only a silence that pierced her heart. With unsteady steps, she looked at her son's photo hanging on the wall, his cheerful face seemingly defying the harsh reality she was now forced to face. Dina bit her lip, trying to hold back the sobs that threatened to break free. The reality that her husband, Ronald, the man she had always seen as a protector and the best father, was now the suspect in their child's murder made it hard for her to breathe. It felt like being trapped in an unending nightmare. "Impossible," she whispered softly, as if hoping that the words would dispel the darkness clouding her mind. The loving Ronald, who always played with their children, was now caught in an accusation that tore her soul apart. Sweet memories of Ronald kept swirling in her mind. She recalled his warm smile, the joyful laughter when he played with their kids. How could the man she loved and trusted turn into a monster? Dana felt a surge of anger and confusion, as if two stormy seas were colliding in her heart. Around her, the outside world seemed to pause, waiting to see the drama unfold. Neighbors and friends could only whisper, watching the news spread like wildfire in the summer. Every glance, every murmur was a new wound adding weight to her burden. Dana felt the stares of people like daggers, sharp and tearing at her heart. In that silence, her hope faded, sinking deeper into doubt. Meanwhile, shadows of the past haunted her, wondering if she had missed any signs. Dana struggled, searching for answers in the darkness of reality, but each thought only led to more confusion. Fear and sadness filled every corner of her mind, as though the frightening darkness of Halloween night now gripped her soul. And as she found herself trapped in this maze of emotions, her hope of understanding who her husband truly was became thinner, swallowed by a thick, dark fog. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence, as if everyone was holding their breath. In the defendant's seat, Ronald sat with his back slightly hunched, hands clenched on his lap. His face was stiff, almost expressionless, but upon closer inspection, there was a faint glimmer in his eyes, a mixture of disbelief and indifference. His face was like a stone mask, cold and emotionless, even though the murder charges were closing in on him from all sides. Occasionally, his jaw tightened and his lips curled into a brief, bitter smile, like someone who felt he had been treated unfairly. In the audience, Dana sat silently, her body feeling frozen. Her eyes were fixed on the table in front of her, unable to look up at the man she once loved and trusted so deeply. How could this happen? How could she have been wrong about him all these years? Her mind spun with no satisfying answers. Every time Timothy's image crossed her mind, the innocent smile, his joyful laughter, the sweet voice calling her mama, Dana felt her heart squeeze with unbearable pain. Meanwhile, the jury appeared restless. Their faces showed tense and shocked expressions, as if struggling to accept the increasingly clear reality unfolding before them. Evidence after evidence was presented by the prosecutor, each one more damning than the last. The courtroom seemed filled with an invisible current of emotion. Every time Timothy's name was mentioned, a small tremor ran through some of the jurors' hands, their eyes averting as though they couldn't bear the horror from the detailed recounting of events. Then, the key piece of evidence was brought forward. A small bottle that seemed ordinary, almost insignificant, but everyone in the courtroom knew how deadly its contents were. It was the bottle Ronald had used to pour cyanide into the Halloween candies he gave to Timothy. The prosecutor explained how, days before that fateful night, Ronald had asked a colleague who worked in a lab about the lethal dosage of cyanide. A witness confirmed that Ronald had been searching for a way to acquire the poison in Pasadena. The prosecutor's words echoed in the almost silent room, each phrase cutting sharply into the hearts of those listening. Dana bit her lip, trying to hold back the storm building inside her. Her breaths were short, almost gasping. The pain now paralyzed her completely. She wanted to scream, cry, and beg God to wake her from this nightmare. But reality was too strong, too undeniable. This wasn't a dream. Ronald, the man she once loved and trusted with their child's life, was the cause of their son's death. When the judge finally delivered the death sentence with a heavy voice, there was no sound except for the soft ticking of the clock in the corner. Ronald's head remained bowed, showing no significant reaction. He stayed silent like a stone, cold, as if he were merely a spectator in this grim drama. However, his eyes briefly glanced toward Dana, just for a moment, but enough to make Dana feel another stab of unforgivable guilt. How could she have missed all the signs? How had she failed to protect Timothy? That feeling tore her apart from the inside, breaking her soul into pieces that seemed impossible to ever put back together. Tears began to flow silently down Dana's cheeks. Her face was pale, her gaze empty, like someone who had just lost her entire world in an instant. Her life was now nothing more than ruins, impossible to rebuild. The voices of the judge, the jury, and even the whispers among the spectators sounded distant, as though they came from far away, drowned in the deep darkness of unending sorrow. All hope had been destroyed. It wasn't just Timothy she had lost, but also the future she once dreamed of with Ronald. That truth was more painful than just losing someone. It was the destruction of a life, the betrayal of love, and the loss of her identity as a mother. As Ronald was escorted out by the officers, his expression remained flat, without any sign of remorse. But behind him, the courtroom left deep wounds on everyone, especially on a mother who had not only lost her child, but also a part of herself. The courtroom had long been empty, and years had passed since the tragedy struck Dana and Elizabeth's lives. After Ronald was found guilty, their lives changed drastically. Dana, who had once believed so deeply in the man she considered her true love, eventually divorced Ronald, severing the last ties of a relationship filled with bitter memories and betrayal. She and Elizabeth tried to disappear from the relentless media spotlight, seeking a place where they could continue living without the haunting shadows of their dark past. Each step felt heavy, and each day was a struggle to rediscover happiness, even if it was just the simple joy of going through daily routines. Elizabeth, who grew into a teenager, carried the weight of memories from the Halloween night that took her brother Timothy. Yet, with remarkable courage, she and her mother tried to rebuild their lives from the ruins. On March 31st, 1984, silence once again enveloped the small family. At Huntsville State Prison, Texas, Ronald O'Bryan, known as the Candyman, was executed by lethal injection. Until his last moments, Ronald maintained his claim of innocence, even though undeniable evidence had convicted him. He insisted on his innocence, but his voice could no longer fight against the justice that had been served. As the final needle entered his vein, Ronald still refused to admit his crime, and silence carried him to his grave. No tears were shed for him. The execution chamber was left with a dark stillness, the final chapter of a tragic story that had hurt so many. In deep reflection, this tragedy reminds us that it wasn't Halloween itself that brought evil, but the darkness in a human heart hidden behind a mask of happiness. Halloween is meant to be a night of joy for children, a night for imagination and role-playing. But in the wrong hands, like Ronald O'Bryan's, a night filled with joy turned into a nightmare. Halloween will continue to be a celebration of fun, but this tragedy will always remind us that true darkness comes from within people, not from the night itself.